So I'm reading my scriptures because I'm doing a show in a couple of weeks on what's happening in Europe, and it is evil, and it's coming here.
Yes.
Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you know is at risk. Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck bring an urgent and disconcerting message, a true warning to all Christians who, perhaps without realizing it, are being surrounded by modern challenges like never before. This warning isn't just about events you've seen in the news recently. It goes much further, touching on biblical prophecies and signs that indicate dangerous times. They call for a constant vigil, an attention not only to the things that are to come, but to those that are already happening before our eyes. It's hard not to feel impacted when figures like Carlson and Beck point out global turmoil and society's moral decline, saying they're not just coincidences. You feel a mixture of curiosity and fear, wondering if we really are heading towards a point of no return. In the midst of so much chaos, they challenge Christians to raise their heads and be protagonists, and not just spectators of a crumbling world. What's happening now isn't just politics, entertainment, or international conflict. It's a battle for people's hearts and souls. What if you could act now to protect what you believe in? If you could make a real, tangible difference in your own life and that of your community, what step would you take? Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck provoke us to think exactly that. In a world that often marginalizes faith and pushes us into indifference, they are here to remind us that hope and action still have a place. But this is not a message of fear. It is an invitation to become stronger, to prepare, and to be a light in the midst of the darkness. If you think this is an exaggeration or that none of this applies to you, think again. Because the changes that are happening in the world don't just knock on other people's doors. They come into our homes, affect our families, and shape our children's futures. And here, Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck are here to open our eyes and help us see what many prefer to ignore. This is a call to action, a reminder that as Christians we must be on the front lines, not backing down but facing challenges with courage and steadfastness. This conversation is for you who are tired of seeing everything fall apart without feeling like you can do anything. For you who still believe that good can prevail, that faith has a role to play in a world where fewer and fewer people talk about God. Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson have an important warning, and that warning is also an invitation. Prepare yourself, be strong, and don't lose hope, because history is still being written, and you have a fundamental role in it. It's curious how the words of Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson sound like an alarm that echoes around the world, especially for Christians. It's no wonder their voices have become so influential. After all, they speak with cutting sincerity about the times we are living in. Imagine a watchman on the tower of an ancient city, watching the skyline and announcing the arrival of difficult times. Beck and Carlson are like these watchmen, warning of the rapid changes and dangers that seem to be approaching from all sides.
Warning!
They make us wonder, are we prepared for what's to come? When biblical prophecies and current events are mentioned, there is a convergence that makes us question whether we really are in the end times. Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck emphasize that it's not about blindly believing, but about looking around and noticing the signs. How many times have we heard about global catastrophes, conflicts, and tensions recently? They remind us that it is not just about random happenings, but perhaps something much bigger and predicted long ago. Like a red alert, their message is clear. We cannot afford to be naive. But after all, what can we do? Glenn Beck suggests that Christians should seek information more seriously. For him, it is essential to read the Bible, but also to understand the world around him. And not only that, looking to different sources, like those who delve beyond the ordinary, like Tucker Carlson or Glenn Beck, can offer another angle of understanding. The urgency is not to remain apathetic, it is to know that we need to act wisely. It's interesting to think about how this might apply to our daily lives. Wouldn't it be worth starting with something as simple as understanding what is actually happening in our neighborhood, in our city, in our country? The sense of urgency they experience is not just about fear, but about the need for vigilance. For Beck and Carlson, a Christian must be someone who observes, who pays attention. We live in times where information is manipulated and agendas are pushed upon us, and they insist on the importance of not being fooled. As if they were friends calling us for a serious conversation, they make an appeal to us. Don't let the rush of everyday life make you forget to keep an eye on yourself. Tucker Carlson even mentions that we should watch and pray, as Jesus himself said. This means having your eyes wide open, being aware and connected to the divine at the same time. And while we maintain this state of vigilance, Beck and Carlson invite us to reflect on what connects us to this moment. Are we just living for the now, or is there something bigger driving everything? They don't just want to scare, they want to open our eyes to what really matters. Like two watchmen in a tall tower, they point to the horizon and suggest that something is brewing, something that demands our attention and our action. As we watch global conflicts, especially in the Middle East, it is as if we are reading the pages of the Book of Revelation unfolding before our eyes. Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson are incisive in stating that current events cannot be merely ignored as simple geopolitical problems. There is something deeper going on. The Middle East, as we know, has a symbolic and spiritual charge that is mentioned in the scriptures several times. Tucker Carlson remembers that, according to Revelation, there would be clear signs, wars, rumors of wars, and nations against nations. Just turn on the news and realize, are we living in these moments? They make a point of pointing out that it is not about panic, but about perceiving reality with a critical eye. After all, how many of us haven't caught ourselves wondering if everything that's happening in the world isn't some kind of warning? Beck brings to light that wars are not just political issues, but signs of something bigger that perhaps we do not fully understand. He mentions that the Christian must be able to see through the smokescreen of the news. And here comes the question, are we seeing beyond the conflicts? Or do we just accept the narratives that are handed to us? A practical example that Carlson gives is not limiting yourself to a single point of view. If you watch one channel's news, why not look for other angles? Why not check out different approaches like he or Glenn Beck do in their own analyses? Beck highlights that prophecy is not something vague or distant. On the contrary, it is like a beacon that guides us in times of uncertainty. When we see so many nations in conflict and violence growing, it is impossible not to remember the words of Revelation that describe a period of chaos preceding a new beginning. He says it is necessary to look at events in the Middle East as a spiritual thermometer, a reflection of the battle between good and evil that also takes place on the invisible plane. The tension in the region is not just political, it is spiritual, and this must be part of our vigilance and understanding of the times. And then the question arises, what can we do about it? Tucker Carlson suggests that we should become better informed, not just about politics and conflict, but also about Scripture itself, to understand how it all connects. He emphasizes that reading Revelation should not be something that brings fear, but rather an opportunity to be one step ahead, to understand and to prepare. In this sense, Glenn Beck encourages Christians not to become indifferent. Participating in discussions, asking questions, and questioning global narratives are fundamental steps. Imagine you, in your community, bringing information about what is happening in the Middle East, generating reflection among your friends and neighbors. The action starts at home, but can have much greater impacts. The rising tension we see is like the rumble of distant thunder, and Beck and Carlson warn us not to ignore these sounds. When prophecies speak of a union of forces opposing Israel, it is difficult not to see the parallels with current alliances and tensions in the Middle East. Their message is straightforward. We need to pay attention, for the signs are there for those who have eyes to see. It's not about fear, but about preparation. Being prepared is, as they suggest, a way to protect your family, your community, and your faith in the face of uncertain times. And like the watchman who watches the skies to predict the storm, Beck and Carlson invite us to be careful observers of the signs of the times. We are not just living in a random context. Everything seems to be aligned for something much bigger. They open this loop of reflection so that we can connect these events with our everyday lives, preparing ourselves for what lies ahead, because there is still more to be analyzed about the current state of the world and the moral challenges we face in our society. Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck aren't afraid to point the finger at what they see as obvious moral decay in today's society. They say that this decline does not happen overnight. It's like a constant, subtle erosion that erodes values that were previously unshakable. One of the most painful issues for both is violence against women. How did we get used to this? How did we get to a point where opening the newspaper and reading about attacks no longer shocks us? They ask us, not just as citizens, but as human beings who have a responsibility to one another. Beck is firm in saying that Christians cannot remain silent in this scenario. He reminds us that Christians must be light where there is darkness, and today, this darkness is precisely the normalization of violence, abuse, and lack of empathy. Imagine seeing someone suffering and turning away. This is exactly what, in many cases, happens on a collective level. Beck uses practical examples, such as the simple act of supporting shelters for women who are victims of violence, or even starting conversations in your community to bring awareness to the issue. You don't have to go far to make a difference. Sometimes it's in your own neighborhood that you find opportunities to act and change the course of this erosion. Tucker Carlson adds that the media plays a significant role in this normalization. He points out how series, films, and even entertainment programs have often reinforced harmful stereotypes and minimized the severity of violence. It's not just a question of entertainment, it is a question of moral formation. He suggests that if we want to see change, we must be critical of what we watch and consume. Why not opt for films and books that value respect, equality, and human dignity? He mentions, for example, the book A Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, as a reading that can help people understand the true meaning of living in community and with purpose. Glenn Beck also talks about how Christians need to be more present in discussions about public policies. Often, these decisions directly affect the way violence is treated, whether through milder laws or a lack of support for victims. He insists that voting is important, but being active between one election and another is even more fundamental. If there is a public hearing in your city about security policies, why not participate? This is often the opportunity to make a difference. The call is for us to not just be spectators of decadence, but active agents of transformation, especially in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. And while Beck and Carlson talk about this moral fall, they also touch on a delicate point, the responsibility of educating the next generations. What are we teaching our children when we accept certain jokes, certain behaviors, or when we simply don't react when we see injustices happening? Beck comments that it's not about being perfect, but about trying, every day, to do something a little better. He suggests, for example, that a good practice is to involve children in activities that promote empathy, such as volunteer work. Imagine a generation that grows up seeing the example of their parents acting, and not just talking about kindness and justice. Carlson makes a point of making it clear that the problem is not just out there, but also within us. The fight against moral decay is also an internal battle. Each of us carries prejudices, indifference, and often the inability to act. He remembers that the first step is to recognize this. The second is to commit to changing. Beck suggests that the Christian should be like a gardener tending a field. If he does not remove the weeds, the apathy, the indifference, the acceptance of what is wrong, the field will quickly become an inhospitable space. And so, as we look at the current state of the world, Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck invite us to reflect on how we can, in a practical way, begin this change. Because as we focus on fighting this moral degradation, we must remember that there is an even broader dimension at play, the political responsibility of Christians, which will be discussed in the next point. Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck approach politics in a way few do, as a spiritual battleground. For them, participating in elections is not just a right. It is a moral obligation of every Christian. Imagine that each vote is a small seed of justice or carelessness sown in society. Beck and Carlson emphasize that in times like these, each of these seeds can be decisive. Not voting or voting without awareness of the impact is, in their view, abdicating an essential role that God entrusted to Christians. The point here is not to support a specific party or ideology, but rather to ensure that gospel values are preserved. Beck suggests that, for the Christian, the Bible can and should be a guide when making political decisions. It's not about looking for verses that mention exactly who to vote for, but about understanding the principles. Justice, compassion, truth, and freedom are values that should guide our choices, and if a candidate or proposal violates these principles, then they should not have our support. Beck remembers that faith is not something we leave outside the voting booth. On the contrary, it is on this that we should base our choices. He cites, as an example, the need to support policies that defend the family and protect the most vulnerable, something that Jesus always highlighted in his words and actions. Carlson goes further to highlight that politics is also a reflection of the values we cultivate in our society. When leaders and laws openly contradict Christian principles, he asks, how did we get here? The answer for him is simple: by omission. Many Christians have avoided involvement in politics, either out of disillusionment or because they think that this is not a Christian field. But he remembers that the absence of good people is the gateway for evil to establish itself. He mentions a practical example. In many cities, small local decisions, such as where to invest public resources or how to organize community safety, can have gigantic impacts. Carlson suggests that, before each election, it is essential that Christians study, inform themselves, and above all, discuss with their communities. Beck reinforces that voting is not enough if between one election and another, we remain apathetic. Political responsibility goes beyond a simple act every 4 years. Imagine an active, engaged community that monitors, demands, and also supports leaders who work for the common good. Beck suggests that Christians form discussion groups, watch debates, and exchange ideas about the proposals that are presented. This way, no one is left alone when making decisions, and there is collective support to act more wisely. He also mentions that, in the past, many justice and equality movements were only possible because Christians decided not to remain silent. The same principle applies today. Tucker Carlson brings to light the idea that the Christian faith must be visible, even in the political arena. It is often said that religion and politics do not mix, but he asks, how can we be truly Christian and not allow our faith to influence everything we do, including as citizens? He says it's not about imposing beliefs, but about being coherent. If we believe that the truth sets us free, that justice must prevail, then we need to support candidates who reflect these beliefs. He says that a great example of this was William Wilberforce, who, driven by his faith, fought tirelessly against the slave trade in England. This is the essence of a Christian in politics, being an active voice for good. Beck and Carlson also discuss the danger of anti-Christian policies. When laws are made to suppress religious freedom or devalue life, they warn that this is the time when Christians must take a firm stand. We cannot forget that omission is often the choice that allows evil to advance. And that is why they are so clear. Every Christian must feel the weight and responsibility of upholding the principles of the gospel. Tucker Carlson suggests combating anti-Christian policies begins locally. It is in the city, in the neighborhood, in the school councils that changes begin to happen. Local politics is often where we have the most impact, and yet it is the one we ignore most. Finally, Beck and Carlson challenge us to see our political participation not just as a civic act, but as an extension of our testimony of faith. They remind us that when we get actively involved, we are, in a way, living love your neighbor as yourself. This means choosing what is best for society, fighting for justice, and ensuring that God's values are present wherever there is injustice. Thus, we open a loop for an even deeper reflection on the challenges within culture itself, especially within the entertainment industry, which will be our next topic. Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson have first-hand knowledge of the world of entertainment, and they don't hesitate to warn about the dangers it can pose to faith and moral values. They describe this environment as a kind of jungle, where the objective is not only to entertain, but often also to distort and erode principles. Carlson mentions how the entertainment industry can be a treacherous field, where subtle temptations can turn even the most steadfast from their path. He himself has seen how some colleagues, once immersed in this universe of fame and success, ended up giving in to pressure and leaving aside their most fundamental convictions. It's a jungle without a moral compass, and you need to be vigilant. Beck shares that he himself has had moments when he felt his faith weakened while deeply involved in the media. It talks about the choices we need to make, especially when what is popular is in direct contrast to what is right. Entertainment can become an idol, something that puts our attention and dedication above what really matters. To illustrate, Beck mentions the example of people who, without realizing it, end up more concerned with the series they are watching than with the time they dedicate to their families or to God. He says that constant distraction is one of the greatest weapons against a life of true and deep faith. Carlson makes an important point about the content we choose to consume. He highlights that the values behind the programs, films, and music we watch influence often invisibly our worldview. There is a glamorization of selfishness, violence, and immorality, which little by little normalizes these behaviors. Tucker suggests that to combat this influence, we must be critical and selective. If we know that a film or series is harmful, why do we insist on watching it? He gives a practical example. There are productions that bring uplifting and inspiring messages, such as A Prova de Fogo and Quarto de Guerra, which not only entertain, but also edify and promote positive values. Choosing this type of entertainment is an act of resistance. Glenn Beck also points out that the entertainment industry often ridicules or marginalizes the Christian faith. In many films and series, religious characters are portrayed as naive, fanatical, or simply ridiculous. This contributes to a negative perception of religion, especially among young people, who are more vulnerable to the messages conveyed by the media. He suggests that, instead of passively consuming this type of content, we should look for productions that show faith in a real and dignified way. Faith is not a caricature. It is a vital element that moves billions of people around the world. If we are critical and reject what tries to ridicule our beliefs, we can also influence the market to value productions that treat spirituality with respect. Carlson talks about the role of entertainment as a shaper of culture and how culture, in turn, shapes people's attitudes. Entertainment is not just a form of escapism. It is also a powerful tool for forming perceptions and beliefs. He warns that often what we watch teaches us more about how to live than what we hear in church or read in the Bible. This is because the narrative has power. It involves, moves, makes us create empathy. Carlson mentions that Christians should, in addition to avoiding harmful content, support the creation of narratives that truly reflect their values. He cites as examples independent Christian production and platforms that bring content that can edify. Beck touches on something even deeper, the void that entertainment seeks to fill. He says many people turn to media and entertainment because they are looking for meaning, an escape, something that brings them joy, however temporary. And that's where the danger lies. Nothing can fill this void in the right way, except something that really connects the person to a greater truth, to a life of purpose. Beck suggests that, instead of seeking the momentary satisfaction that media offers, we should seek activities that truly fulfill us, such as participating in a faith community, volunteering, or even investing time in reading books that inspire. Tucker Carlson adds a personal note about how he decided to distance himself from certain entertainment environments and events that he knew were undermining his principles. He mentions how easy it is to be seduced by fame, status, and glamour, but that, in the end, the peace you feel when being in line with your own values is infinitely greater than any external recognition. Carlson suggests that Christians do the same. If something is taking them away from God, whether it's an activity, an event, or a TV show, then maybe it's time to cut it out of your life. It's not easy, but, as he says, it's always liberating. Beck and Carlson leave us with an important reflection. We cannot underestimate the impact that entertainment has on our lives and our faith. The influence of the media is constant, and the values it conveys are powerful. Therefore, vigilance must be redoubled. And as they talk about these challenges, they prepare us for an essential message about how, despite everything, it is possible to stand firm in faith and remain faithful in the midst of an ever-changing world, a theme they explore in our next topic. Even in the midst of all the difficulties and challenges we face, Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson remind us of something crucial: hope. What they want to convey is that, despite the darkness that seems to spread across the world, the light we carry cannot be extinguished. Carlson says it's easy to feel overwhelmed and even desperate in the face of so much negative news, conflicts, moral decay, and the dangers of entertainment. However, he emphasizes that this is precisely the reason why we need to hold on tighter to our faith. When the storm seems stronger, it is time to anchor yourself even more in the safe haven that is God. Beck suggests that to stay true, it's crucial to find inspiration in the little things in life. He mentions how God often manifests himself in everyday details: a child's smile, the sunrise, a moment of silence that brings peace to the heart. These are reminders that there is goodness and beauty, even in a turbulent world. He also highlights the importance of having daily practices that reinforce our faith: prayer, reading the Bible, spending time in community. It is these small daily actions that strengthen us to face bigger challenges. Imagine taking 5 minutes out of your day to pray, asking for guidance and strength. It's simple, but powerful. Carlson is emphatic when saying that, to face these modern times, we need to be bearers of love. He reminds us that Jesus himself instructed us to love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us. At a time when hate and division seem to be the norm, love becomes the most powerful act of rebellion. Tucker suggests that a practical way to do this is to find opportunities to serve. It can be something as simple as helping a neighbor in need, or dedicating time to social projects that make a difference in other people's lives. Serving is, as he says, the most practical way to spread God's love. Beck adds that hope is not something passive, it's active. It's a choice we make every day. Choosing to hope means, in a way, fighting the hopelessness and cynicism we see around us. He uses the example of great men and women in history who, driven by their faith, did not allow themselves to be defeated by circumstances. He cites Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor who opposed the Nazi regime and who, even in his most difficult moments, clung to hope and love. Thus, Beck encourages us to find our cause, what moves us, and use that as fuel to continue, even when everything seems contrary. Tucker Carlson reminds us that, in the midst of darkness, the Christian must be the lit candle. He challenges us to live in a way that makes those around us notice the difference. When we stand firm in faith, when we choose to spread love rather than hate, we are living witnesses of what the gospel can do. He comments that many are afraid to express their faith, especially in a world increasingly hostile to Christianity. But he encourages us not to be silent. Let your light shine, he says. And that doesn't mean forcing your beliefs on others, but living in a way that is so whole and full of love that those around you are curious about what you have. Beck reinforces the importance of the community in this process. No one can remain faithful alone. He says we need each other, especially in such difficult times. Being surrounded by people who share the same faith gives us strength, encourages us, and keeps us grounded. He suggests that if you are not part of a faith community, you should seek one out. The Christian life was never designed to be lived in isolation. Imagine the impact we can have when we come together. Beck emphasizes that Christian unity is like a wall of resistance against everything that tries to separate us from God's purpose. Carlson and Beck also talk about the importance of spreading this message to the world. It's not enough to just have hope and faith. This needs to be shared. Carlson says that, by spreading love, we are contributing to creating a fairer environment and closer to what God wants for all of us. He suggests, as an example, the idea of sharing words of hope on social media, where so much hate and polarization are spread. Imagine how a simple message of encouragement can make a difference in someone's day. It reinforces that we all have a voice and should use it for good. And so, as Beck and Carlson wrap up this discussion about maintaining faith and hope in the midst of chaos, they leave us with an important reflection. Darkness will never be able to extinguish the light, and love will always be stronger than hatred. They open the doors to a closer understanding, where we can apply all of this in our lives, becoming active participants in the transformation of the world, starting with small attitudes and the way we decide to impact our surroundings. You've come this far, reflected on the messages from Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson, and now it's time to act. All words mean nothing if they are not followed by actions. What steps can you take starting today to protect your family, defend your values, and strengthen your faith? Maybe start by becoming more informed, discussing with your friends, getting involved in your community, or even changing some daily habits that can help build a stronger foundation to withstand the challenges that lie ahead. Remember, hope is not empty hope. It's active, it's courageous, and it's you who makes it happen. By sharing messages of hope, by being an example of firmness, and by being present in the lives of those around you, you are fulfilling an essential role in this world that needs so much light. Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson are not the heroes of the story. You are. They are here to help open your eyes, but the real transformation depends on you. Ask yourself, what can I do today that can impact tomorrow? Small attitudes add up to big transformations, and it's not just about changing the world. It's about changing your world, your family, your friends, your community. Sometimes a simple gesture of love or a word of support can set off a life-changing chain reaction. So don't wait any longer. Start now. If you've come this far, you know you can't go back to indifference. You are called to be part of the solution, to be an agent of change, an ambassador of love and hope in a world desperately trying to find meaning. Be that person that others can look to and feel hope for, the one that acts when others prefer to remain on the sidelines. This is what it means to be faithful and to be courageous in times of trouble. And if you believe these messages can help others wake up to reality and take action, please share this. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue following our content. There is much more to be discussed, much more to be understood, and we are on this journey together. The first step has been taken, but the road is long. You are essential so that we can remain firm, spreading truth and love in the midst of chaos. Let's continue side by side.